welcome back to Trista's Reading Room. I hope you had a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Also, today is going to be a giveaway video, so I did mention this briefly in my introduction video. I am going to be doing giveaways of the books that I received a physical format of. So today I'm going to be giving away Stargonauts by C.E. Stone, which was the second video that we did. I'll go into more details after the video and after we talk about the book that we're looking at today. So stay tuned and check out the end of the video if you want a chance to win the paperback of Stargonauts. Today we are going to be looking at Avalon by Valerie Howard, and the revised version was published in 2019. A slave since childhood, Mara awaits the death penalty. But when the prince she betrayed arrives at the prison, promising freedom in exchange for allegiance to him in marriage, Mara agrees to his terms. Her hasty decision is soon tested. The journey to the palace is riddled with difficulty, but Mara has nowhere else to turn. As she presses on in the face of fierce wolves, violent lightning storms, and the threat of being captured by the rebel army she deserted, can the unlikely princess learn to trust her lifelong enemy? Avalon is the first book in Valerie Howard's Kingdom Journey series, and is perfect for fans of light allegorical Christian fantasy like Pilgrim's Progress. So this is book 1 in the Cyletial Kingsom series, and it is a standalone. This is for ages 12+. There is some violence. The main character tries to get the cruel guards angry enough to kill her, and they beat her and others up and break her bones. You can find this on Amazon in all formats: paperback, hardback, ebook, and audiobook. Here's a little bit about Valerie. Hi, I'm Valerie. I live in the woods of Maine with my husband and 2 boys. I've been writing stories since I was in 2nd grade when I wrote The Mystery of the Missing Crayon. I gave up trying to write mysteries, and now I mostly write real-life stories that tackle tough issues. But I also dabble in light allegorical fantasy. All of my books are filled with the hope and love of Christ, and are uplifting and feel-good, with happy, though sometimes tearful endings, as the characters overcome their obstacles with God at their side. She says that Pilgrim's Progress was the inspiration behind this book. I wanted to write an adaptation for modern audiences with a female main character, and a deeper character point of view. You can find Valerie on Facebook, Instagram, and on her website. And as always, you can find all of these links and the information about the series on our website. Chapter 1. The girl continued to dig. Mud and water lathered her hair. Scraps of cloth clung to her bones. The ache in her muscles burned as the steady rhythm of her shoveling rose above the sound of falling rain. Down. Push. Up. Again. Down. Push. Up. Again. Staying silent to avoid further injury, she put her words to the rhythm. I hate the king. I hate the prince. She clenched her teeth together to stop the chattering. Anger warmed her cheeks. The guards whistled for work to cease, and she wiped the sweat from her forehead. As the sun hung low in the sky, the silhouettes of hundreds of slaves turned away from the large ditch and toward their ride back to the dungeon. The girl ran toward the cart and horses, ignoring her limp. Elbowing her way through the crowd of shuffling bodies, she arrived at the wooden platform and flung herself onto the rotting boards, so she'd have room to sit instead of stand. Her weary body groaned as another workday came to an end without calamity, and she allowed herself to breathe a little easier. A guard tripped a prisoner who had inched too close to him, and the slave landed face first in the mud. Not flinching at the scene, the girl averted her eyes and scanned the massive slave yard. The iron gates loomed ahead, but they were barred tight as always, locked and sealed until the day the king arrived. Chipped fences bordered the fields for miles. A scraggly garden grew their meager vegetables. The guards' barracks stood as far away from the underground dungeon as it could, as if keeping a safe distance would shield the guards from the constant reminder of death. When she'd first arrived at the slave yard, the violent tempers of the guards forced her and the other prisoners to skitter about doing their duties, learning to mend fences, paint them, dig the ditch, and peel the vegetables. They obeyed for no other reason than to avoid punishment. But the longer she lived here, the more she discovered obedience meant self-destruction. They mended the fences to keep themselves in. They dug the deep ditch for their own bodies to be laid to eternal rest. And they prepared food to stay alive until the day of doom arrived. There was no escape, not from this place, nor from her impending punishment. She'd handled the cold fact over and over again in her mind, smoothing it over, examining every lump and notch. But the process failed to soften the truth. In fact, it sharpened the blade. She would die here after digging her own grave, and there was nothing she could do about it. The girl closed her eyes against her harsh reality, leaned on her shovel, and tried not to fall asleep. Mara! Mara, wake up! Wake up! You're going to get us beaten! Mara! At the last hiss of her name, Mara lifted her head off the shovel, just in time to jump to the ground and lay her spade on the pile of tools. She shifted to the middle of the single-file line and let her eyes wander beyond the dungeon, beyond the guards' barracks, beyond the crooked fence, forcing herself not to recall her life before the rebellion. Something howled in the distance, causing goosebumps to prick her skin. The line quickened its pace. Passing the starlit dining hall, Mara flicked her gaze to the kitchen. Hunger crawled at her stomach. Evening meal ended hours ago, and morning meal couldn't come fast enough. Perhaps Blythe had stolen some stale bread during kitchen duty. She hurriedly descended the moldy steps at the mouth of the underground cavern to find her friend. Mara squinted at the plump girl across the dark room and called to her. "Anything?" Blythe shook her head, her front tooth flashing in the trickle of torchlight shining from the stairway. "Nothing tonight. Watched too closely after the cheese disappeared." She chuckled. Mara's cheeks burned. Her hunger was nothing to joke about. More and more slaves filtered into the damp cell, and she needed to find a cot before she slept on the floor with the rats again. Finding a worn cot in the corner of the room, she collapsed onto it, careful not to aggravate the fresh cuts and bruises from the day's work. After closing her eyes, she wished for sleep to mute her empty stomach's cry for food. She cursed King Aldous and Prince Justinus aloud, and heard several grunts of approval from the bodies sprawled out around her. "Long live Lord Druid! Down with the prince! The true king will arise! Rebel victory!" Mara smiled for the first time in weeks. Those two monsters should be the ones digging ditches and sleeping in dungeons. I deserve to be the one living in a palace and eating rich pastries. At the thought of food, Mara's stomach lashed out again. She opened her eyes and bit the rough calluses on her pinky until she forgot about the pain in her belly. As she turned to lie on her side, she noticed a pair of thickly padded shoes on the floor. The girl next to her had been foolish enough to remove them before crawling into bed. Mara swiped them and put her tattered pair in their place. She winced as she slid the new shoes over the sores on her swollen, cracked feet. A whisper of guilt tickled her heart. What? She's a stupid girl to leave something so precious out in the open like that. Serves her right. Maybe this will teach her a lesson. Besides, I've done far worse. Mara shoved the nagging heaviness away and wiggled her toes, satisfied that no flesh peeked out to greet her. She closed her eyes to once again search for sleep. When the rotten king comes for me, I'll spit in his face before he has a chance to dodge. An unexpected jolt froze her blood. The 70 lashes coming her way would end her, no question. 40 could kill a horse. She'd be dead before King Aldous reached 15. Mara growled and cursed his royal majesty again, louder this time, wishing the rebellion had been successful for the millionth time since arriving in this wretched place. She would spit in his face when she met him, yes, but he would get the last laugh. Chapter 2. The wake-up call sounded, the guard shouted, and every slave scrambled outside to avoid the punishment for dawdling. Pacing back and forth on the cobblestone in front of the jagged line of prisoners, a guard in heavy black boots frowned and wiped his brow, sweating already in the morning sun. The air stood dead still this morning, and Mara bit her lip. The weather was unpredictable in this part of the kingdom of Avalon. Yesterday, cold and rainy. Today, shaping out to be a scorcher already. "You!" The guard pointed to the slave wearing Mara's old shoes. "Kitchen!" He continued down the row, assigning the prisoners various tasks, some less appealing than others. "You, fields. You, fences. And you." The guard pointed a dirty fingernail at Mara and smirked. "The ditch." At the slump of Mara's shoulders, he pouted and batted at her cheek with his clammy hand. "What's the matter? Don't like digging any more?" As his meaty palm made contact with her face, fire scorched Mara's chest. She balled her fists, braced her feet against the hard stones beneath her, and tried not to show her fury. The guards may have decimated her will, but she refused to let them break her spirit too. She allowed herself to imagine stabbing the guard, realizing too late she couldn't afford the luxury while still under his examination. The hairy man yanked her chin up and caught sight of the hot insolence in her eyes. He rocked her head from side to side in slow motion, her hair loose and swaying along her back as he contemplated how he'd torture her. In one swift movement, he grabbed her shoulders and slung his knee deep into her hollow stomach. Tears welled in Mara's bulging eyes, and she crumpled to the ground. Mouth agape and frantic to suck in oxygen, she wrapped both arms around her middle and curled her legs under her body. A sickly feeling radiated from her core, and she wished with all her might he would end her here and now before she threw up. But of course, he wouldn't. "Get up, you pig!" When she couldn't help but empty her stomach bile on his shoes instead of obeying, he swung his leg and kicked her in the shin, again and again. He laughed as she struggled to rise, wiping his slimy boot on her rags. Lightning shot from Mara's hip to the tips of her toes. She bit her lip to stop a cry from escaping her mouth. Whimpering would only encourage him. "I said get up!" Determined not to give him the satisfaction of another blow, Mara rolled away and pushed herself off the ground, commanding her body to stop shaking. "And get to the cart! You've work to do, slave!" Mara lifted her spade and hefted her aching body onto the cart. The noxious odor of mud and mold, mixed with manure, assailed her nostrils as she imagined what she'd do to that man if she could catch him sleeping. The guard whistled to attract the attention of the driver. "If that one right there gives you any trouble today," he narrowed his eyes at Mara, "break her fingers again." The blood drained from Mara's face and she teetered. "Don't faint. Don't faint." The guard shared a grin at her reaction and turned their attention elsewhere. A few deep breaths through her nose steadied her nerves. She refused to move for a full minute. No use drawing any more attention her way. Finally, feeling safe enough to rub her sore stomach and steal a discreet glance at her bloody leg, her mind occupied itself as she waited for others to board the cart. It had been 15 years since she had been captured, give or take. She hadn't kept track of the years or her birthdays. She was 12 when they arrested her, she knew that. But her youth had won her no mercy. Everyone seized that night had been brought to the slave yard to await their punishment for high treason. A lifetime of hard labor, followed by 70 lashes hand-delivered by His Royal Highness. Her involvement in the rebellion had made sense back then. Where had she gone wrong? She hated King Aldous. Joining the revolt had been a simple choice. She signed up for the rebel army without a moment's hesitation. It had been a noble cause to support the rightful king of Avalon, hadn't it? Lord Druitt could never fail. At least, that's what she believed. But the thousands of slaves wandering around the prison yard this morning proved otherwise. Lord Druitt's attempt had been defeated, and King Aldous continued to rule in peace. Now, to spend her time in toil until the king decided to mete out her punishment, working, digging, mending, and cleaning day after day until the day of reckoning arrived. Mara didn't know when the time for the lashes would come, but she hoped with all the strength she had left that it wouldn't be today. Her reflections ceased with the carts jostling on the bumpy road. Another day of digging the ditch. Another day of blood, sweat, and backaches. Of insect bites, cuts, and arid wind. Maybe she'd die before the king had the chance to come and kill her. She sneered at her useless musings. No one would escape that easily. She knew better. Even the guards weren't allowed to kill the slaves, though sometimes they came close. The king had reserved that privilege for himself alone. The cart stopped with a lurch, and the slaves climbed off. Mara dropped to the ground and limped to her place beside Blythe. "At least it's not raining," Blythe whispered. Her optimism made Mara imagine slapping her across the mouth. "Shut up! You know how hot it gets without the rain? Oh wait, no, you don't. You've had a cushy kitchen job for all these years. It's bad enough you got yourself reassigned and can't steal extra food. But I'm not going to listen to your stupid chatter all day too." Blythe cast her gaze to the ditch and kept her mouth shut, making Mara's anger dissipate as quickly as it had flared. She winced, wishing she'd been more patient and hadn't let her temper get the better of her. But what was done was done. No use dwelling on actions that couldn't be erased. Mara cracked her shoulder joints to loosen them and approached the same large trench that she'd been digging for weeks. Ditch duty had taken its toll on her body, and the thought of another moment of shoveling through the heavy mud sent a murky wave of nausea through her gut. A chirping bird on a nearby branch drew her attention. The cheery yellow creature looked at her, blinked twice, and took off, flying high in the sky and out of view. To be a bird and fly away. She sighed, as memories of the night she'd earned permanent ditch duty flooded her mind. The night she realized the guards couldn't kill her. The night she discovered a worse fate than death. The night she tried to escape. 7 or 8 months had passed since then. Maybe 6 or 9, but who could tell? Time didn't matter in the slave yard. On that night, she'd been angry. The guards had been especially cruel during the day, and Mara had gotten a splinter from mending a fence. She stopped working to remove the splinter, and a guard knocked a tooth out of her mouth as payment for her delay. Something inside her broke in that moment, and she realized now that it was her will. Her will to stay alive. Her will to take another breath. All she knew was she needed to get out, to remove herself from this wretched situation, no matter what it took, and no matter what she had to risk. Even if it meant leaving the boundary of the fences and tempting the hungry wolves. During evening workload, she'd concocted a plan to run away or die trying. It had seemed so simple while she mulled it over as she worked on a broken section of fencing, and she wondered why she'd never attempted it before. She'd slip out of line after the evening's work and into the shadows of the dining hall. The back door of the kitchen was never locked, and the large bags of grain in the storage closet would make the perfect hiding place. Then, long after dark, while most of the guards snoozed in their barracks and only a few roamed the grounds, she'd make her move. There were a few weak spots in the fence that had yet to be repaired, leaving holes large enough for her scrawny body to wiggle through. Of course, she needed someone to cause a distraction at the front of the line. Pick a fight with another slave or some other nonsense. Maybe choosing a different accomplice would have brought her closer to escape. But Cor betrayed her and tipped off a guard in exchange for a better duty, even after Mara promised she'd return to free her as soon as she could. The burly guard must have watched with his cold eyes as she slipped across the pitch-black field away from the kitchen's back entrance. When he tackled her, Mara's heart crashed to the ground along with her body. She'd been 10 feet from the broken fence, 10 feet from freedom, 10 feet from leaving it all behind. "Got you!" The guard snarled in her face, shoving his weight onto her, crushing her lungs. "Where do you think you're going? No one escapes. Though nothing would bring me more pleasure than feeding your corpse to the wolves." He would have looked stern and imposing tomorrow when she'd first arrived, but the guards didn't scare her any more. Nothing did. Nothing but the lashings. He had broken every finger on her left hand before delivering her to the dungeon. Mara cried out as each finger gave way, the guard's powerful fists snapping her bones like carrots. The next morning, he had been all too pleased to lock iron shackles on Mara's ankles. She had to wear the chains for 3 weeks. Not only had the shackles etched large, oozing craters on her skin, but they had slowed her down even worse than her limp. Failing to meet her ditch-digging quota, thanks to having the use of one hand and half the use of both legs, instigated further cruelty from the men in heavy boots. She became accustomed to being the last to squeeze onto the overcrowded cart, the last down the stairs to find a sliver of floor space to sleep on, and the last in the meal line to receive the remaining few crumbs, which could never satisfy her rumbling belly. Finally, the guards tired of waiting for her and removed the iron weights. Mara now understood who could escape the slave yard. No one. The only escape, if one could call it that, came by suffering a bloody death at the king's hand. No other way. They were watched day and night. Anyone attempting to expedite their death sentence on their own was shackled until they were too weak to do the deed. Mara blinked as she turned her attention to the task before her, stabbing her spade into the dirt. Blythe followed Mara's lead, after blowing a few wispy hairs out of her eyes. After 3 shovels full of mud, Blythe wheezed and wiped sweat and grime from her forehead. "How do you do this every day, Mara?" "I imagine I'm digging a grave for the guards." "Silence!" A rock bounced in her direction. Mara and Blythe dodged the stone, but it grazed Mara's arm. Acting as if the rock had hit her square on the shoulder, Mara doubled over and yelped. Satisfied enough not to attempt another throw, the guard turned away. Mara and Blythe glared at each other. Mara went back to digging as sweat trickled down her back. Another long day. And that's it for Avalon today. If you want to hear more of this story on Trista's Reading Room, let me know, or check out our website and Amazon to find the book. Alright, super quick, we're going to go over the giveaway for Stargonauts. This is a paperback signed by C.E. Stone. I will be mailing it to the winner. To enter the giveaway, all you need to do is comment "enter" below in the comment section of the video, either on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. If you follow on all 3 and want to comment on all 3, then you can, and that's going to be worth 3 entries. You can gain extra entries by tagging fellow people who you think should come and join Trista's Reading Room, either being authors or people who you think would enjoy the books that we are sharing here. Come next week, I'm going to be gathering all the entries, and I will throw them into a giveaway generator online, and then I will be picking the winner and contacting them to let them know that they are the winner, and then they will need to provide me with their shipping address so I can send them the book. So, good luck, and if you want to win, please comment "enter" below in the comments. Thanks, and have a great day!